In this video, I'm going to show you why most people have weak and vulnerable lower backs and what you can do to build a strong, capable, and bulletproof lower back. I'm a qualified sports scientist and I've worked for over 6 years coaching amateur, semi-pro athletes as well as average Joes, and I've rehabbed my own lower back issues as well as many other injuries and lots of lower back issues with my clients as well. In this video, I'm going to give you the direct in the trenches experience that I have from rehabbing my own lower back injuries as well as my clients and all of the things that I wish I knew before I got injured. So I'm going to talk about first what everyone gets wrong about lower back rehab and injury prevention and why these common approaches have probably failed you. Next, we'll talk about a general approach that you can take to address your back pain that you can also use as a more broad framework for understanding injury, rehab, and prevention in general. Next, I'll talk about the biggest misconceptions and mistakes that cause and create back pain and that prevent people from actually getting out of it. And at the end, I'll give you my top exercises in priority order that you need to be doing in order to rehab and prevent lower back injuries. And then after that, I'll let you know how you can get the exact sets, reps, and exercise details for these exercises so that you can slot them right into your session right away. Alrighty, let's get into it. So this is what a lot of people get wrong about back pain rehab and injury prevention. The common story that I've experienced and that I've had my clients experience is you have pain, you go to a physio, they give you a scan, and then they link the results of that scan to the pain in your back, and usually you're told to rest and avoid certain movements and take anti-inflammatory drugs. You might also get handed a generic program with things like bird dogs and dead bugs and side planks and the McGill Big Three, and you'll likely just get better on your own from the rest, but you won't build any true lower back capacity to truly rehab yourself or most importantly, prevent that from happening again. And quite commonly what actually happens is because of this avoidance of movement and focus on rest, the muscles that actually support your lower back and prevent injury start to atrophy and reduce in size and strength, further creating like a negative cycle that makes the problem worse and worse. And I've worked with people that have had lower back issues compounding over and over again with further weakening and further degradation of the structures and more rest and more anti-inflammatories and less movement capacity. I've seen people in cycles of this for 15 years. A young guy that I worked with called Riley, top level rugby player playing schoolboy rugby in Brisbane, he had a lower back injury for 3 years before we worked together, and it only took us 6 weeks to solve. That whole time he'd been going to physio twice a week. So what's the problem? In my experience, most physios and orthopedic surgeons that I have interacted with don't actually have a serious physical practice of their own. And so the advice that they give is not tempered by or put through the lens of being a movement practitioner, struggling with injury or rehabbing their own injuries or pursuing legitimately challenging things or movement competence in their body continuously. And that makes a huge difference in terms of the advice that you give. There's a difference between reading from a textbook and copy and pasting to a client to really having embodied and experimented with and understood on a deeply embodied level what you're actually doing in the rehab process. And this is one big problem that I see, is that there's so many theoreticians and not many practitioners out there in terms of movement when it comes to rehab. What I've also seen is that the emphasis on rest and avoidance of movements, typically, you'll have things like don't bend down, don't flex your spine, don't do things like sit-ups. And it's actually commonly these abilities to flex your spine with skill under load that actually are the way out of pain. And to avoid them reduces your capacity to move in those ways in any safe capacity. If I was to tell you to never touch your toes again with a round back, then if you ended up in that position, you're sure as hell going to get injured because you're so unprepared for that movement. This isn't to say that all professional practitioners like physios and orthos are bad. It's just to say that the majority of them that I've interacted with and that my clients have interacted with have treated in this very same way. And I've seen the results of that and they haven't been positive. And I've also experienced the results of a different approach and they have been incredibly positive for myself and my clients. So take this with a grain of salt, just as everything you see on the internet, but do your own thinking and see if this makes sense for you. So what is an approach that you can start to take today to start making a difference in terms of your lower back? The goal isn't just to reduce pain, it's actually to improve the capacity of your lower back. You need to restore movement, you need to restore confidence, strength, mobility, as well as awareness and control in your lower back. And you do this by training consistently with a goal in mind and gradually improving and increasing the intensity over time. Lots of lower back injuries differ in different reasons, and this won't apply to every one of them. But the majority of lower back injuries that I've experienced and that I see clients having and that I know exist in the general population are pretty tame and preventable. But people get caught in these interventionist cycles where they're getting surgery, they're resting even more, they're avoiding even more movements, and they just end up pretty much impossible to do anything with their back below 45 degrees in a perfectly fixed angle, which, the reduction in terms of the movement that your body actually experiences and can adapt to, the narrowing of that means that you've got this tiny window that you can exist within without breaking. The idea is to expand that window as much as possible so that anything you come into contact with your daily life in terms of a movement solution that is required for a movement problem, you have already experienced in some way, shape, or form, and you're already ready for it, and you have the capacity to deal with it. So this advice won't apply to the very, very top percentile, the most intense back injuries, but the majority of ones that exist in society are preventable and easily treatable if you use the right methods. And the goal is really to have that expansion mindset. And that's what really comes from strength and conditioning, not rehab. And that's why there needs to be this molding of the rehab pain prevention kind of like paradigm and philosophy, and also the strength and conditioning philosophy. And these are things that are really cut, they're very severed. Usually there's not many physios that I've worked with, only one in fact, that has actually a decent understanding of strength and conditioning as well as injury prevention and pain management. So what are some of the biggest misconceptions and mistakes that people make when rehabbing a lower back? Most people think that when you have a weak or injured lower back, your core is to blame. And for starters, the definition of what people call core is completely different. So that word means very little these days anyway. And the problem with this as well is that quite often you'll get prescribed, or people will pursue exercises that are core exercises in air quotes, and they're really just incredibly low level isometric exercises that are good for people that are in huge amounts of pain and need to get some kind of stimulation and activation to the muscles. But in your rehab journey, and if you're not even in pain and you just want to build a more resilient back, these exercises like bird dogs and like dead bugs and some forms of planks as well are going to become redundant incredibly quick in your training journey. The other thing is that most people that have a weak core don't actually have a weak core. It's mainly a weakness in the connection between the limbs and the core. So the shoulder complex and the hip complex is most of the time where people fall down. And again, the training, awareness, and knowledge around how to actually properly strengthen and increase the capacity within the shoulder complex and the hip is really limited in general rehab circles as well. For example, a lot of people don't realize just how integrated your hip stability is with lower back strength and lower back pain. Every person that I've worked with that has had lower back pain has had poor hip stability as well. And when worked on through different angles by improving things in the hips and in the lower back specifically, as well as any other areas that may relate, you get this multifaceted approach that actually attacks the problem from many angles. Here's a couple quick pro tips in terms of how to manage your back pain more effectively. So low-grade movement, things like standing up and just swishing your hips around in a circle in a controlled manner, or doing hip tilts where you're moving between posterior and anterior tilt on the hips 4 times. So I think like 2 minutes each direction on the hip circles, like 5 minutes of movement in total. That really desensitizes that area in terms of pain, brings blood flow, brings movement, brings repatterning so that the nervous system actually feels safe to move again. And these really low level but very frequent and high volume movements are incredibly important in the rehab and the resilience equation. Alrighty, so what are some exercises you can do to start rehabbing your lower back? So number 1 is the Jefferson curl. So the Jefferson curl It's pretty much a round back deadlift. You start from the top, you bend all the way down with straight legs, tuck in the chin, and roll all the way back up vertebrae by vertebrae. You gain control of your spine by doing this. You gain the ability to tolerate load through spinal flexion, which is one of the main things that people will tell you not to do. And it's one of the main things that you actually need to do if you want to build a resilient lower back. This will not be the right exercise to do the day after you injure your lower back. But with time, starting with body weight and building up over time, people have built this to over 150 kilos with zero problem. And it's actually the people who can tolerate load and who have built the capacity to lift with a round back that commonly don't get injured when they have a round back, right? The people that only lift with a straight back are the ones that bend over in this kind of position and get injured. But if you learn to tolerate load and become strong and mobile, and aware and build control through that range of motion, then you'll actually be able to tolerate heaps of situations where you're in that range of motion and not get injured. Alrighty, number 2, the QL side bend. There are 2 options, standing and also lying like this. In the 45-degree machine, 45-degree back extension. This one is preferable. This is what the exercise looks like. So you're kind of like front leg, top leg in front, bottom leg behind, and you're reaching down for a nice big stretch in your QL, your quadratus lumborum. That muscle runs between the bottom of your ribs and the top of your pelvis, and it makes up the flanks, the sides of your lower back. Incredibly important muscle for athletic power, as well as lower back rehab and injury prevention, and probably one of the most overlooked muscles to train. Most people haven't even heard of a quadratus lumborum. Most people don't know how to train it, and therefore most people haven't. But the impact that you will get in terms of your lower back strength and resilience by training this muscle through a full range of motion, ideally in the 45-degree back extension machine like this, getting a good stretch in the bottom and building up with weight over time, the impact that you'll get is going to be huge. So you can do this in the 45-degree back extension like this. You can also do a standing version like this, which is also fantastic, just in a split stance, holding a weight and bending over to the side. And if you're listening to this as well, jump over to the YouTube channel if you want to see any of the exercises that I'm going through here, or you can just look them up as well. This one's called the QL side bend. Alrighty, number 3 in terms of strength exercises is the 45-degree back extension performed in the 45-degree back extension machine. You want to go down nice and deep. This person's mobility is great. That means that they can get down to the bottom with a straight back. That's not the goal necessarily. If you can't get down the bottom with a straight back like this person because you're not as flexible, then allow that lower back to round to get your head as close to the ground as you can. Because again, just like the Jefferson curl, you want to be able to go through a little bit of spinal flexion in this exercise in order to actually train your ability to control and tolerate load through spinal flexion. So this is a great exercise. This is a short range exercise too, so it won't place too much tension on the tissues in comparison to something like an RDL. An RDL would be a long range exercise in terms of a strict hinge, just like this. Just drop a comment if you need me to explain any of those concepts. But this short range hip hinging exercise is going to be great for the lower back erectors, the muscles that run either side of your spine, and don't be afraid to round the lower back in the bottom. With these ones, I like to start off single leg. It's very, very challenging even at body weight. Go at single leg until you are competent at it, and then switch to double leg. Building that foundation in single leg is super important. So the 45-degree back extension is a massive, massive player in the game of lower back and recovery, as well as injury prevention. Alrighty, so the first 3 were exercises that directly relate to and directly strengthen your lower back, with the Jefferson curl being a full range of motion round back deadlift. You've got the back extension and the QL side bend as well. This is going to target your hip stability, and it's one of the best exercises that I have come across to really integrate your lower back strength with your hip stability. And it's a single leg deadlift. With the kettlebell, this is what I like to start with. It's almost a single leg squat with the kettlebell held in front of you. My torso is quite upright and I'm not going to be leaning over very far, not like a single leg RDL where a lot of people will get wrong here. They'll keep that knee too straight, they'll bow over from the hips and their back will end up parallel to the floor. That's not what we want. We want to end up in a kind of squatted position in the bottom, which will allow the knee to bend more and place even more challenge on the hip stability in this exercise. The reason as well why you're weighting the exercise on the opposite side to the stance leg. So I've got the weight held in my right hand and I'm actually using my left leg to complete the exercise. The reason that I do that is because it actually pulls, like imagine that right shoulder being pulled down by the weight. And there is a connection between your right shoulder and your left hip through your lat. And to have that cross stability between your shoulder and your lat really helps lock in your lower back stability, but it also places an additional challenge on the hip stabilizers on the left side in this particular example here. Incredibly important to do the contralateral version. Once you've got, to about 20 kilos here on the kettlebell, 5 sets of 5, something like that, then you can start to move to a barbell, and that's where you can start lifting some proper weight and really feeling insane glute activation. Also, just as a cheeky little suggestion, this is probably one of the best ways in which to improve your glute activation and strength as well. If you do this exercise properly and execute it well, your glutes cannot not activate because they are required to in this exercise. And that's a constraints-based approach to glute activation, which I think is a much better way to go about it than just pursuing things like clams and stuff like that are going to provide very little like in context glute stability practice. Whereas this, you're actually going through a loaded squat, but your hip stability is very challenged. This is going to be an absolute banger exercise for improving your hip stability, which will increase your lower back stability, as well as your core strength through the back as well. And you're just going to fire up your glutes as well as a lovely side effect and get stronger in a squatting / hinging pattern in both of those as well. Alrighty, so that is the strength exercises all done. They were presented in order of important as well. Jefferson curl number 1. So now we're going to go into the mobility exercises, which are really, really important and commonly impactful for lower back rehab and injury prevention. So stretching out the glutes are going to provide a lot of tension in the lower back, hence why strengthening them with that single leg deadlift is going to stabilize the lower back. But with the glutes can commonly get super tight and cause additional strain in the lower back. So what you can do is stretch them out. This is one of my favorite techniques to do that. Super accessible. You can play with lots of different options as well, but kick your foot up on a box or a surface that is, just under hip height or something like that, depending on your mobility. And you want to place your hands down on whatever you've got in front of you and aim your head towards your foot. So you're trying to get your forehead to touch your heel. If you can do that, just sink into the exercise deeper. You can also let the knee flop down more. You can also weight this exercise by holding a kettlebell or a dumbbell in this arm here to kind of pull you down. But this hip external rotation stretch is going to hit your glutes. You can also experiment with different twisting, aiming your head towards different areas as well, and that'll hit different areas of the glute. You just got to find yourself the part that feels the best. But the big thing is with these mobility exercises is by actually using movement to come into and out of the position. As you gain competence with the movement, you can start to place more load through that leg. For example, at the start, I was showing you how to do the exercise just with your hands on the box, right? But now I lift my hands off the box. I'm actually lifting my entire body weight just with that leg. So therefore, I'm building strength through a full range of motion here, which is really important to both open up, but also press save on the mobility file that you've just opened up with a bit of new range. Hip external rotation stretch is number 1 importance in terms of mobility for lower back rehab as well as prevention of injury. Alrighty, second, you would actually have Jefferson curls, but because they are both a strengthening and mobility exercise, I chucked it as number 1 in the strengthening category. But as number 3, you've got these couch stretches. They are going to open up your hip flexors, predominantly your rectus femoris and your iliopsoas,
so as to not pull your spine unnecessarily into anterior pelvic tilt. There's nothing wrong with anterior pelvic tilt. A lot of people demonize it. And again, it comes from the whole school of thought of like, your body should be this particular way and you need to restrain your movements if it's this way. And that's not a good way to go about it because you're just restricting your movement capacity. Anterior tilt isn't necessarily bad, but having your hip flexors excessively tight, which most people's are, can place additional strain on the lower back and contribute to lower back pain or susceptibility to pain as well. So a bit of hip flexor stretching never goes astray. This is how you do it. Set up in a couch stretch. Look it up if you can't see it right now. But shifting forward and back in a slow pulsing manner is going to be the best way to open this exercise up. Sometimes I do static stretching, but this more active method of stretching where you're moving into and out of a range of motion, and ideally you're increasing the load that you do that with over time, is going to provide much better mobility gains and allow you to retain the mobility that you gain much better as well. So pulsing back and forth with the couch stretch between pushing the hips and the shoulders back towards the wall and pushing the knee forwards and the hips forwards. You're going to get different stretches in both positions, and that's why it's really important to make sure you're hitting both the forwards and the backwards position in the couch stretch to open up all of the hip flexors.
So if you want to know how to do each exercise exactly, and talking sets and reps and specific goals and standards that you're trying to hit with each of those exercises, just drop me a DM on Instagram. Link is in the description below, and I'd be happy to help out. Thanks so much. See you in the next one.